Hi guys, so I've been getting a lot of requests to just show how I do appliques on diapers. I'll probably do this in two parts. Some people just want to see the applique and other people want to see how I construct a full diaper. So this first part is just going to be how the applique is done, if that's all you want to see. If you want to see how I do the whole diaper, you can go to the next video and it will show how I complete the diaper with the applique. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is have a diaper pattern, and you're going to want to find the center point along the length. So try to be as accurate as possible because this is going to be the center point for your embroidery as well. So this line right here indicates my center point for me. What some people choose to do is cut their pattern out perfectly to size first, and then they do their embroidery on that. I personally prefer to waste about an inch around the whole thing. I have an inch down here at the bottom as well, because if I mess up just a little bit, that gives me leeway and some room to move it if I didn't do it perfectly. So it's just a matter of preference and how comfortable you are. I have done stuff with like the 20-inch cuts from diaper sewing supplies that give me no room to mess up, and with experience that's doable as well. I just prefer, in case I mess up, which I do still do quite often with centering, to have just some extra room around the whole thing myself. So you can cut, a crude shape of your diaper. Make sure you have some room around it, unless you're comfortable doing it right on it, which I wouldn't recommend to do for beginners. So what I start out with is just doing a hard line across the top of the pattern right here, and I use Crayola washable markers. They are a lot cheaper in the long run than using anything that's made for fabric that is disappearing or washes away. So I use these. They wash out really well. I really like them. I do use disappearing ink for some things, but I'll show you that in a second. So I do a hard line across the top. It doesn't matter how big you do it, just big enough to see. And then from your center point, you're just going to want to go just up. It doesn't have to be perfect, just do a line straight up so you know exactly where that center point was. So now when I remove my pattern, I can see where my center point was and where the top of my diaper pattern is going to be. So when I go to do my embroidery, I know that I can't go above this line. This is where the top of my diaper is going to be. So what I do at this point is I use an acrylic ruler, and this is where I finally use my disappearing ink. And what I'm going to do is I want to measure about 1.75 inches below that mark I just did. And I'll take any of these inch points. Let me zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. I think that's better. Hopefully. I'll take any of these inch points, so I'm just going to use 10 inches, which is right here for this, and I line it up with that center mark along the length that I just did. So I have 10 inches pointing downward like this. So what I'm going to do at this point is measure 1.75 inches down, and this is just the length I've come up with since I've been doing this for a couple years. I started with 2 inches, then I tried 1 inch, and 1.75 ended up being the best length choice for me. Hang on one second. It gives room for the elastic to gather and your seam allowance, and still have the embroidery high on the bum of the diaper. If you do it too low, it gets really difficult to see what your embroidery is, especially when you're doing things like birth stats or anything that has words. The lower you go, the more it gets lost in the legs and the gathering for the waist elastic. So you want to try to keep it high, but not so high that it's going to interfere with your elastic that's across the waist. So I've got it at 1.75 inches right here. So from the top of where I marked my diaper is to the bottom point that I'm about to mark is 1.75 inches right here. And I've got my center point marked right along the 10-inch mark right here, so I know exactly where my center is. And I'm sorry if this feels really slow and redundant. I'm just trying to take it slow for people that don't have a lot of experience in this. So if you already know all this stuff, feel free to skip ahead, but I'm just going to take it really nice and slow for everybody that isn't already familiar. So what I do at this point is I just draw another line straight across with my disappearing ink. Doesn't matter how big you do it. And then at that 10-inch mark where I know my center point is lined up with, I just do a little dot. So it's darker than the rest of it. So now you should have something that looks like this. So you've got that top line that indicates the top of your diaper, then 1.75 inches down you have another line, and what that line indicates right there, that's going to be the top point for our embroidery. So top of the diaper, top of embroidery, and your center point matches up all the way down. So what we do at this point is hoop your stabilizer. I am one of the people that prefers to hoop my stabilizer and float my pole instead of hooping my diaper fabric and hooping my stabilizer. I personally just find that I get a better stitch out if I'm floating my fabric as opposed to hooping it. Some people prefer the other way. It's just however you are more comfortable doing it. I learned by floating, so I'm not comfortable hooping fabric. So if you're more comfortable hooping, you can do that. It's going to be a little bit harder for you to get a perfect center point, but it's doable. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hoop my cutaway, and I'm using a medium weight cutaway from MJ Sewing Supply. And I buy pre-cut. I don't remember the exact size that I buy pre-cut. That's like 12 inches, maybe 11 inches by 9, something like that. So it's much bigger. This is a 5x7 hoop, and I go much bigger, a couple inches bigger than 5x7 because I want it to be able to fit the whole stabilizer in the hoop. So if I get 5x7, that would just be this size right there. The stabilizer wouldn't fit. What I do is I trim off all the excess stabilizer right here because I don't want anything to be pushing on my fabric or do anything that could potentially distort the design. So I cut all of this off. Try not to cut so deep that you go in between your hoops because that'll just mess it up. What I do next is I do the baste stitch function on my machine. And what the baste stitch function does is it gives me an outline of where my embroidery is going to fall. So before I even think about putting my diaper fabric on there, I'm going to load this in my machine and I'm going to do the baste stitch function. So this is what you want to do. I don't know if you can see that very well. Please don't look at the lint in my hoop. That's horrible. That's what it looks like. So it's just a square, and it's thread, it's basted, it's a really long stitch length, so it's really easy to pop out. But the way I do it, you don't even have to pull the stitches out, so don't even worry about that yet. So this is exactly where my embroidery is going to fall, so I know exactly where it's going to be in this. What we do now is we use magic. This stuff is called 505 temporary fabric adhesive. I spray it on there. It is lifeblood. Some people do it without. Well, if you're floating and you're doing it my way, it's going to be really hard to do it without. I wouldn't try to do it without temporary spray adhesive of some sort. I've found this 505 to be the best as far as water solubility, and it washes out pretty well. I've never had an issue with it. Some people have. I don't know if maybe it was like a manufacturer issue or what happened, but I've never had an issue with it, and I know several others that have not had an issue with it as well. So make sure you know where the top and the bottom of your design are going to be. My top's here, my bottom's here, and I still have my marks going on. So for me, I'll mark it because I don't know if you can see it. My hoop has an indicator to show me where the center is, and that's about right here. So I can see where the center is, and I'm going to match up this center point that we drew earlier with that center point there. So again, this bold hard line is the top of your diaper. This soft purple line down here is where the top of your embroidery is going to fall. So line those up, and you may end up covering it. That's fine. Just gauge where the center is. It may take a couple tries to get it perfect, but just be patient and make sure you get it perfect, because you don't want to be impatient. Do it a little bit perfect and then it's a lot noticeable later. So that is the center point for me. And I don't know if you can see through this. Hang on, I'll bring it up to the camera in a second. Rub all the fabric down, make sure it's got a nice stick to it, get it as flat as possible. But if you can see that, there's my line that we drew earlier, and just barely underneath that you can see the base stitch that I did earlier. So I know exactly where my center is and exactly where the top of my embroidery is going to start, and that's going to align perfectly with the point that we marked 1 3/4 inches down earlier. So this is exactly how it's going to go in my machine. Like I said, I float, I don't hoop, I don't need to clip. The most important thing right now is to make sure you don't tuck anything underneath. If you put it in your machine like this and you didn't catch that you had fabric on the back, it's going to eat all that up. And this is going to become part of your embroidery stabilizer, and you don't want to do that. So we've got this exactly how we want it, and now we're going to go over to the machine. Okay, so now I've got my hoop on my machine. I've got my fabric floated. It is held down nicely with my basting spray. And just to illustrate, this is what I was talking about earlier. When you load it, if you're not paying close attention, your wing will probably get stuck under there. You don't want to do that. So just make sure that's out of the way. So I don't know if you'll be able to see, but we're gonna try. This is the applique I have chosen to use, right there. It is from Designs with Character. I'm about 94% sure. I bought it a while ago. I'm doing it for like a Halloween stocking. So this is the applique I'm choosing to use because it sounded like more people were interested in seeing an applique done than filled embroidery. So that's what I'm going with. It looks like, off the top of my head, I'm thinking probably just 2 applique pieces, yellow, brown. There could be one in that eye, I don't think so, but I'm not entirely sure. So I just make sure I have on hand my brown and my yellow. I'm gonna use the sun gold color from Diaper Sewing Supplies instead of the yellow color because I think it looks better for this little duck. Then he won't be a bright yellow guy, he'll be kind of a darker yellow, which I think just looks better. And as other people had asked, I always use the polyurethane laminate for my applique pieces. On some occasions I'll choose to do a different kind of fabric, like if you saw the gorilla diaper I did, he had jeans, so I used denim. If you do something like that, you're going to want a heat and bond light to put on the back so it doesn't fray. I rarely do stuff like that though, so most of the time I'm just going to use same fabric I'm using for the diaper. So the first step, and like I said earlier, I'm going to break this down really simple, assuming that the people that are watching this have no idea what to do and they want to start at step 1. So the first step for an applique is going to be the stitch out. So it's going to be my stitch placement. I made a bad choice of doing this video on a design I've never done before, so I'm not 100% sure about what the stitch order is going to be. So I might have to amend some of the stuff that I say here and there, but I'm pretty confident that this first step will indeed be the stitch placement. So we're going to go ahead and start. I don't have the cutting tool turned on my machine because I just don't like it. So it stops after 10 stitches and tells me to cut my thread. That was my tail, so I just did that. I'm going to start it up again. So awesome. That is my placement guide. I know this is where I'm going to want, my arm is going to get in the way a lot, I'm sorry. This is where I'm going to want my fabric to go. And so if you recall what our design looked like, this is going to be the wooden base that the toy sits on. So I'm going to take my brown fabric, and I don't use like a, what do you call those things that's sitting on my desk right there? A cutting machine, like a Cameo or a Cricut or anything like that. I don't used one of those to cut my applique pieces before, which a lot of people do. I don't like it. I think it adds way too much time. In the long run, it costs more on machine maintenance, things like that. I take a scrap piece, and I've got tons of scraps. I throw it on there. I start it, and I do a big no-no, which is hold on to the fabric. Don't do what I do. Don't hold on to the fabric. Do as I say, not as I do. I've seen those gross pictures that circulate on Facebook where people are like, look, I put a needle through my finger. Learn from me. I still risk it because I'm awful. A lot of people use not a spatula, yeah, a rubber spatula, like a silicone spatula, and kind of push stuff down. But I live on the edge. I'm an adrenaline junkie, so I'm just gonna keep putting my fingers in there. And so I just make sure my fabric is held down, taut. I hope you guys can hear me over this machine. So just in case you couldn't hear me, I was saying I just hold my fabric nice and taut. I don't want to get any wrinkles in there because this is actually going to loosen up a little bit when I have the whole thing finished. So even though it looks nice and tight now, there's a chance that it could still have a wrinkle or something in it when I'm done. My camera died, and I found a cord that hooks into the back of my camera and then into my charger and then into an outlet, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. We're good to roll. So the last step I did, which was probably like 10 seconds ago for you guys, so I don't know why I'm explaining it, was the base, the wooden base of our ducky character. I trimmed the applique. So next, since we have that tack down done, most of the time, one of two stitches is going to come next. For some digitizers, they put a zigzag stitch around the whole thing, which just kind of holds the loose edges in place. Some of them don't do that. They do that step later, they skip that step entirely. I don't know. I don't know what this one's going to do because I haven't used it before. So I think what this one is going to do next is probably going to be the outline for the duck body, just guessing based on the stitch order I have here in front of me. So let's just start and see how wrong I am. I guess that's kind of better. A little bit. Well, not like that, it's not. Okay, so if you saw that, what happened here was it did the duck's body right here, and then it jumped. We call this a jump stitch. I'm going to trim that. Again, some machines will automatically trim that. Mine does. I have that function off because I don't like it. You can see my duck's outline. And again, here's that sun gold color that I got from Diaper Sewing Supplies. My camera's trying to adjust it. And it's a good, like a, kind of like a golden yellow, not quite a gold, not quite a yellow, somewhere in between, like a sun gold. Duh. I like this color for a duck more because they're not bright yellow. So I don't think you can really see that very well anymore, but I've got that back in there. If you want to be smart and not risk the life of your fingers, you could use that 505 temporary basting spray I was talking about earlier and spritz it on the back of this fabric and then stick it down. That works. Again, I like living on the edge. I don't do that because it's smart and safe. So now we're going to cut it. And actually this time I'm going to move my hoop to its trim position just to kind of move it out of the way a little more. I don't know why I didn't think of that last time. There. So I'm going to trim that jump stitch. And honestly, I use my snips more than I think I use my applique scissors. I find that I get a lot closer to my this stitch than if I use the applique scissors. I mean, the applique scissors definitely have their place. They keep you from cutting too close in, where the snips don't really do that. You just have to be careful with snips. You could easily cut over your threads, which you want to try not to do, which I did right there. But it's gonna be okay because I just barely did it. So you want to try not to do that. And try to get nice and close, because if you leave too much, after that final stitch goes down and it looks beautiful and it's perfect and you're so happy with it, and you see that thread poking out because you just barely missed cutting it short enough, it gets frustrating, especially if you're trying to sell stuff. So I did the body, now we're going to go back and do the head. These snips have been my favorite that I've used so far. These ones are from the Viking Gallery in the Joann stores, and if you just go in there and you say you want a pair of their snips, they should know exactly what you're talking about. Again, that's these. I love them. I think they were somewhere between $10 and $15 at my store. So this is good enough. This should be good enough. So now you see that we got really close to a lot of the stitch lines. I could take it closer in some spots, but just from the amount of experience I have, I know that the satin stitch is going to cover that. I'm not worried about it. So I'm going to stop because I'm not worried about it, remember? Okay, now I'm going to put it back to my current stitch position and move this back so you can see what's happening. Now, okay, so now it looks like we're going to do the satin stitch, and that's the one I've been talking about. That's the nice tight little stitch that goes over the edges here. Here's another, just a personal preference kind of thing. Some people love using water-soluble stabilizer on top of stuff. It looks like this. It's almost like saran wrap kind of thing. It's got a smooth side and a textured side. Its intended purpose is napped fabric, so if you're using terry or chenille or something fuzzy, you would absolutely use this. I use it on knits 95% of the time, not always. I don't ever use it on diapers. I think I used it on a diaper once that had like a 70,000 stitch count, which is very high for people that are new. This has like an 8,000 stitch count. So I might have used it once, but I find it really unnecessary. I don't get a better stitch out using it, but there are some people that swear by it. So it's just another thing that you'll pick up. It's just another little sewing intricacy that people find along the way. Like I said, I had started doing lots of different things and finally kind of fine-tuned my own routine to get the best stitch for me. So you're going to hear different things from different people that prefer to do stuff in different ways, and that's fine. This is just kind of a starting point for most people, in my opinion, and you can take what I do and kind of develop your own routine or follow exactly what I do if it really works for you. I know that when I first started, I followed a tutorial by Little Boondas, and the way I do it has changed significantly since then. So following tutorials is definitely a good place to start, and then you kind of develop your own routine as you go. I know several other cloth diaper seamstresses that do it way different than me, and that's okay. They get beautiful stitch outs too. So feel free to change this up and do whatever you feel like doing. If something works better for you, good, go with that. We all kind of have our own little ways of doing stuff, so do whatever works best for you. This is what works for me, so this is why I'm doing my tutorial this specific way. So here we are at the end of the stitch out for my brown satin stitch, and the wheels are what we call a filled stitch. So I'm just gonna do the usual. I'm actually gonna take out my brown thread that I've been using since the beginning at this point. So I'm just gonna pull this thread all the way out. And I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna trim all those jump stitches that it did, because it did have a couple. And I always use my snips for this because they're very sharp and they give a really, really precise cut. And you can get very close when you're using this, when you're using snips. So my machine's telling me that my next color is going to be gray. And it looks like that's going to be maybe like a little handle happening on the front right here. So let me find something suitable. So I'm going to be using this shade of gray. Except I'm not gonna focus it. You'll never know. Somebody had brought up a really good question. She was having difficulty with her embroidery and getting a decent stitch out on polyurethane laminate. One, the stabilizer was not adequate, so I can't recommend enough using a good medium weight stabilizer for under 25,000 stitches. Two, another thing that we noticed is she was using a size 14 needle. I exclusively use a 9 when I'm using applique from Diaper fabric. So now what's going to happen is we are going to move on to the satin stitch for the deck, the body. It's going to be very similar to the brown that we did. Alright, so we're at the end of my yellow, and I'm going to do the same thing I've done with the other guys, and that is bring it to my trim position. Boop! Right there. More or less. And start trimming all those jump stitches. So he has creepy little teeth, which I did not foresee. It was really hard to tell on the screen that he had little teeth. I mean, I know he's from that movie. I mean, I know what the movie's called, but Nightmare Before Christmas. And we're gonna go back to our current stitch position. Is that good? Do you think that's good? I think that's probably okay. And now it wants me to use red because our cute little ducky has flesh wounds. So, you know, just good old baby stuff. So I'm done with my red. I'm going to pull it out of the machine towards me. And I'm going to go back to my trim position. Oh, whoops. I didn't want to do that. Right there. I just realized, like, I'm doing a diaper with blood on it. And so, like, I'm sorry if this offends anybody. Dead serious. I don't do blood. I don't like bloody stuff. Just ask Patty. Patty knows who she is. I don't do gore. So if this is offensive, I'm sorry. It's for Halloween. But if you don't like it, you should probably stop now because I'm about to put like holes in his body. So it's just gonna get worse from here on out. And now we're gonna use black. Black is a color I have a lot of hesitation to use because if you just get the teeniest, tiniest bit of bobbin thread showing on the top, it's gonna stick out like a sore thumb. A lot of the times if I'm doing a lot of black on one design, I'll switch to an all black bobbin color. Then if any bobbin thread does happen to show up on top, which can still happen once in a blue moon, even if your attention's perfect. Where was I going with that? I don't remember. So anyway, I have a white bobbin in right now. You can buy colored bobbins. I don't, because I don't tend to have too much of an issue with that. So if you're going to be doing a lot of black designs, I recommend getting some black bobbins. I always use pre-wound because I'm lazy and spoiled. So let's hope that doesn't happen, but if it does happen, at least you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So we're at the end of the black thread, and I think I lucked out and I have no bobbin thread showing, so woohoo me. Back to trim position. Bet you didn't see that coming. This is gonna be a really long video unless I choose to do like some kind of time lapse, which I haven't edited a video since I was in high school. So I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to figure out how to cut and splice and do all that fun stuff. So there we are. I think it's actually pretty cute. Back to our current stitch position. And now we are going to use white thread. Alright, now we are going back to the black for his little pupil. And it looks like we are on our last step, I believe. Let's see, we are at thread count 7,500 out of 8,000. So I'm pretty confident this is our last step. And that's gonna be his creepy little beak. And that sound means we're done. So I'm going to pull him out, trim this. And there he is. Isn't he cute? If you're into that. So what I'm going to do now, because I want to get through all of the embroidery related stuff in this video, that way in the construction video we just do straight diaper construction. It has nothing to do with embroidery for people that aren't interested in embroidery. Next I'm going to pop this guy out of the hoop and trim the backing. Okay, so here we are again. I have him out of the hoop. This is what your back side looks like. It'll be an ugly mess. That's okay, nobody's gonna see it. You will notice I didn't use anything water resistant. That is because I use a full piece of diaper material, the polyurethane laminate on the back. Some people do this pouch method where they just do a pouch right here. I'm not really going to get into that because I don't want to confuse anybody. I don't do that. I've found it to be, well, I guess to be blunt, kind of just a waste of time. I end up using almost an equal amount of pull. I call it pull, by the way. Some people hate that. It's like nails on a chalkboard. I'm sorry, because that's what it spells. I found that I use just as much when I am backing my snaps as and covering my embroidery with the pouch method as I do with just using a whole piece of the fabric. So I just use a whole piece now. And for what it's worth, the white polyurethane laminate I get from Constant Crafters. I find that she has the best wholesale price in bulk. I think I buy like 22 meters off her at a time, and it's a really good price, really affordable. So if embroidery is something you think you're going to get into, that's a really good investment, is to start buying some polyurethane laminate in bulk. So you can back it fully. If you want to know how to do the pouch method, I think that Krista Tracy at one point did a tutorial on it on her website. Since Rocket Bottoms has changed ownership, I don't know if her blog is still up. I'll look into that for you guys. She shows you how to do the pouch method. And some people like it, some people don't. I'm team don't. What I'm doing right now, because once again I'm not talking to you guys, is just trimming the little bits of excess thread that stand straight up. Like, I think there might be one. Yeah, there's one right there. You don't really have to do this. I just do it because if I'm using, it's a habit. If I'm using a light colored fabric and I have a big long black thread, you'll see it through the light colored fabric. And if you have your diaper sewn up and then you find that thread, like, you're screwed. You have to go back and seam rip everything and pull your layers apart to get it out. So I've just made it a habit to trim everything long that could potentially show through. So what I'm doing right now, sorry, is, you remember that baste stitch we did, or maybe you didn't do, in the beginning? Like I said, you don't really have to rip it out. I just cut around it. So I'm just going through here and making sure there aren't any little black threads stuck to it that I missed. And I don't think there are. So this is fine. You could go in and trim more if you wanted to. I don't see really any reason to do so. You'll notice once you do that, you kind of see, you'll begin to see like a little bit more puckering. But that shouldn't be an issue once you have the diaper sewn up completely and everything is gathered. It's a non-issue. You're not really gonna notice. So that looks good. The stabilizer around the outside, well, it doesn't look good if you can't see it. Looks fine. So the next step is going to be adhering it to a solid piece of the laminate. Okay, so what I have laid out right here, this white fabric, is just plain white polyurethane laminate, pulp, PUL, whatever floats your boat, sinks mine. So I prefer plain white. Use whatever color you have on hand. Like I said, I buy my white in bulk, so it ends up being cheaper for me to do it this way. At this point, I come back to my beloved 505 and I spray the back of my my embroidered piece, and I'll just plop it down on here and smooth it out as much as you can. If you do this method the way I'm doing it, you will inevitably find some wrinkles, like right here and here, up here. It's fine, it's going to come out fine, unless the wrinkling's really severe. But if it's just, if there's a couple wrinkles, puckers here and there, I've had wrinkles that go all the way through and the diaper comes out totally fine. You can't tell once you've stitched it out and installed the elastic. Plus, once the adhesive stops working, like after you wash it, or it has been on for so many weeks that it just starts to come apart, you won't see those puckers anymore because it's not stuck to the flat fabric. I don't know if that makes any sense, but don't worry about it. Don't freak out over wrinkles. It's going to happen. It happens to me. It happens to everybody. So the next part is just going to be cutting out your diaper cut, but I'm going to stop here, and if you want to see how the diaper is constructed, you can move on to the next video. But for now, this is just how you do the applique. So if you already know how to construct a diaper by yourself, you're just going to start treating this as one piece. Treat these two layers like they're one layer. So if you're going to make a pocket diaper or something and you're going to use athletic wicking jersey, cut your jersey, sew it together like one diaper, you're done. But if you need a little bit more assistance on how to actually construct the whole thing, or you want to see how I do it, go ahead and watch the next video and I will show you how to complete the diaper in that one. Thank you.